Welcome back to Expert Instruction, the Teach by Design podcast, where we dive deeper into the research surrounding student behavior by talking with the people implementing these practices where they work and with the students they support. I'm Megan Cave.
I'm Danielle Triplett.
Oh, we did it.
Yay. Good job,
and
Megan.
Here we are. We're here today live and in person with a crowd of people, a giant crowd of people.
Yeah, let's get a cheer from the crowd.
In the bustling metropolitan town of Spokane, Washington, at the Northwest PBIS Conference. What annual is it?
24th.
The 24th annual. It's a long time. Danielle was just sharing with us how she was here in not here.
No, it
not
was in
Spokane.
Eugene. It would have been like
at the Hilton.
The Hilton in Eugene, maybe 2007
with that carpet
or 8.
that had been there for 45 years.
It's been a minute.
Yeah. It was a while ago, but now here we are, and we're doing the podcast live for the very first time.
Yep.
And joining us today,
I'll introduce our guests.
Our two guests.
Okay, so we have Becky here from Battleground Public School District in lovely Battleground, Washington. And she's been a part of that district for the last 18 years as a school psychologist and or as a district MTSS coach, so wearing a few hats, like many of us. But maybe most importantly, to me personally, of course, I connect with this, that Becky has an adorable French bulldog, and will gladly show photos on demand if you want to see its perfect little face, which we have a group chat already. And
dog faces have been shared.
Yeah, I of course share Penny on there, so yes. And then we have Charisse. Welcome, Charisse. She's here with us today from Salem-Keizer Public Schools in Salem, Oregon. And she started her career in that district as an elementary school teacher, and then eventually became one of the district's first elementary behavior specialists. Now she works at the district level, where she continues to advocate for what teachers, students, and families need by focusing on systems that create supportive and inclusive learning environments. Welcome, Becky and Charisse. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So we have on our podcast, we have a series that we like to add to every once in a while, the Mythbusters series. Does everybody remember Mythbusters with Jamie and Adam? And they would often blow things up with whatever that ballistics gel.
I'm not as familiar with it as you are. No.
It was on TV at the hotel last night. That's funny. It was incredible. So anyway, what we set out to do in this series is to confirm or bust a commonly held thought about PBIS. So we've explored a lot of different myths, and today what we wanted to do was talk about this idea that districts are using our evaluation data as a gotcha. That they're trying to set us up in competition with each other to see whose implementation is the best, or if my implementation isn't going as well or achieving the outcomes that we want to see, that somehow that information is going to be used punitively. So that's what we want to talk about today. Is that true? Is that not true? Yeah. Oftentimes we come up with a place that's pretty in between, it just depends. But that's where we're at today. So that's what we want to talk to you guys about. Where do you guys think this myth comes from?
Well, I can talk about in Salem-Keizer. We actually first started with the SET.
Oh, are you guys familiar with the SET, the school-wide evaluation tool?
I used to go around and do sets for schools.
Yeah.
And then we changed to the TFI, and I think in that change is where it came from, because there was this competition to get 100% on the SET.
Oh yeah. Fidelity is a competition.
Yeah.
And teachers want to get A's.
We do. We want to get A's. We strive for the A's. And so when we changed to the TFI, on the SET, fidelity was 100%. Well, on the TFI, it's 70%. And so we had schools striving to get 100%. And so there was this thought, because we would bring it to the, like you talked about, we'd bring it to staff, we would bring it in front of administrators and in front of different groups, and we would talk about where schools were at. And de-identified, but there became this thought that we then used that data as we were coming in to coach and do different conversations. We were using that data as a way to evaluate where they were at. And I will say part of that also was a difference between coaching and consulting, right? So when we were coming in as a consultant, you're coming in from the head part instead of a coach, which is like the question part. And so when we're coming in and you're not asking questions, but you're doing more telling, it definitely feels like it's more of an evaluation rather than just a tool that we can use to help grow.
Yeah, I think it comes from very well-intentioned folks who want to use their data and our school's data to improve our community, our school community, and then of course, folks who feel like who are maybe having amazing results with their TFI, they want to share that, they want to celebrate that, and year after year, if they're the same group of folks who are being able to celebrate, then that tends to have an impact on buildings who maybe are struggling a little bit with their implementation or with staff changes. There's so many things that can go into scoring of a TFI. And so it comes from, I think, a really good place typically. And then if there's not some soft skill around how to roll that information out, or if there's not an idea about the impact that could have, then I think we get into the weeds of competition and comparison.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Well, I wonder too if there are other data sets that people submit to districts that might have in the past been used more typically in that punitive way.
That's what I was going to say. Is when we rolled this out, we did not do a great job of explaining the why.
It's really nice self-reflection, Charisse.
Hey, thank you. Because the why is really important. It explains how that data is going to be used and what the intent of the data is. And when I look back, in years past, even when I first started within the district, there was always this thought of you have to perform and you need to be the best. And again, we like A's, right? Our teachers tend to be very high performing, like we want to achieve, we want to do the right thing. And so then in that, because we didn't explain the why, and I do think because of some historical interactions, it became something where it was an evaluation on who they were, not necessarily, and and thinking about like the administrators and their ability to lead, rather than like what do we need to do well, like so that we can ask how are our kids, right?
Yeah, because it's an evaluation of your work.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, so it's hard not to take it personal.
Yeah.
Nice job bringing us back to what's best for kids, though. I like that's what it's all about. So really, if we're evaluating the systems and practices, what would you say the purpose is that data serve in evaluating those systems and practices that we're implementing?
I think one of the shifts that we made in our district, and we had about a 10-year journey where we received a couple of different grants through the Aware Foundation. And so when we first started, it was very specific to building implementation. And then as we grew, we started looking at it at a district level. What is our district level implementation? Where are all of our primaries, at in terms of their tier 1 implementation? And what is this pointing us to in terms of our coaching support, in terms of our district leadership support? And so taking some of the ownership and responsibility that districts are experiencing in their implementation and then turning that back toward ourselves as a district leadership team. And when we started publicizing and talking about it that way, then it pivoted a little bit. The intentionality became about support and aligning our professional development that we would create, aligning our coaching supports and efforts at the tiers that needed it most and at the buildings and supports that needed it most because they were most impacted by various challenges. And so that's the shift that I think we had from that beginning place of we really didn't know what we were doing, and we had to learn an awful lot, right?
Yeah, right.
Which is a great place to be.
I was so involved in what she was saying. Will you read the question one more time?
I will. The question is,
That's so good, Becky.
Becky might have covered it, but you can add, Charisse. So what purpose do data serve when we're evaluating the systems and practices we implement?
Yeah, I think data tells a story.
Yeah.
And our stories are important. And so it tells a story of, areas where we're doing really well and we can celebrate. And it also tells stories of areas where we can grow and we can ask for help. And so I think one of the things that we've really talked about is to be able to do that, you have to have a relationship. And so yeah, relationships are key to be able to change the story. And so that was one of the focuses that we that we started working on is how do we have the relationship with our schools so that we can go in and have the conversations to help explain the story and not explain the story in a way that made them feel like they weren't doing well, but explain the story in a way of we always have areas to grow. We should always be refining, right? Like our students, our staff, our building culture are never the same. And so we might have times where what we did last year isn't what we were doing this year. And that's okay. It just tells the story. And so how are we then adjusting our practices based on what that data is? So we really now are starting to work on how does it just tell your story and how do we adjust our practices? And it's hard because it also requires schools to be really vulnerable and lean. And so how are we leaning into that vulnerability? And I would say one of the things that comes to my mind is, for me, I have to do that first. So I have to be willing to lean into my own vulnerabilities first. So I have to be willing to show how I use the data to identify the areas that we need to grow in. So we as the district need to grow in. And then we also, I'm going to take us on a tangent. We just did.
I have to tell everybody, whenever the word tangent comes up, I learned, because I go on them all the time. You guys, literally all the time. And when I would do that, I was talking with someone often, and anytime I would start to like veer, he would stick his hand right up on top of his head and draw that tangent line with his arm on his head like this and just say, well, you're doing it. Sometimes I pay attention, sometimes not, but take us there.
But we're going to
go.
Let's
go. Let's do it.
And I think one of the ways that is actually beneficial is we started doing the DSFI.
Okay.
So we started doing the
district level. Yeah.
What is it called?
District
Fidelity?
Systems Fidelity Inventory. I think.
Yes.
So many acronyms.
I know.
Fidelity inventory.
We could have a whole conversation in acronyms.
Oh,
Just
that's
saying.
wild.
But we started doing the district fidelity inventory. And so then we started talking about how we needed to change some things because
Modeling.
we were seeing areas where we weren't scoring well. And so again, leaning into that vulnerability.
Yeah, data is information.
Yep.
That's all it is.
Yep.
It's information, and no one can make a decision or help you if you don't have the information, right?
And if you're not being honest about
Yes,
it.
yes, the honesty.
Like you're just,
Yes.
I think that doing the DSFI was helpful in our journey to start pivoting a little bit about what the data's intention was and how we could use that. And we really leaned into the vulnerability piece of that data and saying, yeah, gosh, guys, we wouldn't expect you to get, 75% on tier 3 implementation when there are 5 markers here that we have not built and supported at the district level. And we know this through completing the DSFI and being vulnerable and transparent about that journey. And that's okay.
Yeah.
it's just where we are, right? It's just, a picture of a point in time.
It leads to an action plan. So it is like, if you're thinking about like, how do you change things? You have to have that action plan. Yes, you have to be aware, but that's one of the things I tell them is, the scores are great. I love the conversation that you have. So as you're doing this, we actually stole is a good word. We borrowed it from Noah Van Horn in Springfield. It was a TFI action planning document, and we use that, and it tells their story. And then it builds the action plan for them, because I like everything where like it's all in one place. But it builds the action plan for them, and it documents their conversation. Because I'm like, it's more about the conversation that you're having.
Yeah.
Scores are important. Yes, I get that. But I like the rich conversation that you have. That's where you grow. That's where you as a team bond over the areas that you need to work on, and the areas that you get to celebrate together. And now you team, take that and share that with your school, because that's what they need to hear is we hear you, we see the areas that we need to grow, and we also want your thought process. So please give us that information as well. So it also allows that school team to lean into gaining the voice of their staff, gaining the voice of their students, of what they want to see. So it really becomes a collaboration tool rather than just a you did it right or wrong tool.
I think what you're talking about, though, this building relationships is something that Danielle and I have really talked to a lot of people about, that, and what we heard from Dr. Felicia Singleton this morning during the keynote, which is that you can be implementing all day long, but really it's about the trust that you can build within your context, and that your implementation has to be a reflection of the people in your school. And if you're not doing the work of building relationships and trust with people, then ultimately things just fall flat and it withers. And so how do you do that? Because for some of us, and I think in some situations, building those relationships is simple. Like, it's so easy to talk to the two of you. It's so great.
We could
I
do
feel
this
like
for
I could
hours.
do this forever. And then there are some people that it's a little harder to do that with, And so how do you manage those relationships when you're coming in from the district as a coach, let's say, talking to a team to try and encourage them to be honest with their data and to talk about what is it that's actually needed for improvement? How do you build those relationships? How do you bridge that divide?
I guess I can speak to a practice that I developed, which was just, I thought, how am I going to connect with these new admin that I maybe haven't worked with? And yes, I've been in the district a long time, but if they don't know me, they know that I'm not an administrator, first of all. And so that can be an invisible barrier right there, right? As a coach, you're often not an administrator, you're a TOSA. And so going in as a certificated staff member, they think you don't know because you haven't facilitated, or they're just recognizing the experience you don't have that they do. So again, no ill will. But one of the things I tried to do was to set up a meeting at the beginning of every year with my administrators in each of my buildings and say, based on what you've been going through in your building, what is it that you need of me this year? And where would you like me to step back a little bit? Where would you like me to push in? What do you think is going on? And then we would also take a look at, latest TFI scores, and that might contribute to some of that conversation and say, well, I see that you're struggling a little bit here. Do you still want me to hang back a little bit? Or, do you want some ideas about how we could move some of this forward? And sometimes I would offer up that maybe it wasn't me who needed to be the deliverer of that support or that conversation, that it might be them, it might be someone else, it might be them and I working together. So I would provide lots of options and just ask and listen to hear their experience and what their needs from me were. And what I often saw is over time that then those guards fell down, and I was able to then be a little more authentic and just jump in where I thought I needed to.
Yeah, that's good. I think for me, so I'm sitting here thinking about like when I first started in this role, there was some of it where the TFI was used as more of you need a coach, so you're going to get coached.
Right.
And it was more about the action rather than like the thought process. And then I came in thinking again more along the lines of like a consultant. So I came in and was telling schools what they needed to do, and we took a break from that. And I'll tell you,
A little self-reflection there.
the first step in it is actually your own self-reflection of like what went wrong. And so I started thinking about like, and learning more about like, what does it actually mean to coach? And so really what it means to coach is to ask questions. It means to sit in conversation with people. But to do that, first you have to be welcome in the school. And so I adjusted my method. And I just would do, I first started with, honestly, just drop-ins and connection with the behavior specialists. So I didn't actually start first with the administrator. I started with the behavior specialist first. And then as administrators saw me in their buildings more, then they started saying, what are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, I'm just stopping by to say hi. Or like we would send out little notes. We tried to think about how people feel appreciated. So we would send out little notes like, we appreciate you. This is a hard time of the year. Please let us know if you need anything. We put coaching time on our calendar where behavior specialists could self-select to get coaching. So we started with more self-selection of those who wanted to. And then we actually used that internal informal network. And what started happening is a behavior specialist would say, man, I don't know what to do. And they would say, oh, I talked to Charisse and this is something that she said. You should talk to her. And so what ended up happening is it became more of an informal process with a formal structure. And so we then in those coaching conversations with the behavior specialist, I started saying, do you think this is something that your administrator would also be interested in learning? Yeah. Okay. Well,
interesting.
Why don't we find times to connect? Or, I could come in and sit in on one of your tier 1 meetings and just talk about what's the purpose of a tier 1 team and how we can structure it. And then the other thing that I started doing is pointing back to the resources that we had. So you're struggling with this, here's a resource that we've built. Let me know if you need any questions about it. Because also I think we're professionals. We don't always need somebody to walk us through every step. And so I just would say, here's what we've got. Here's our coaching structure. Here's the form that we use. Here's a suggestion that I used when I was in my school. Let me know if you have any questions. We can always tweak it. Your school's going to be different than my school. And I think even just in that acknowledging that you're different than I am, you're going to approach it differently than I am, really helped. And so we had to move from more of I'm going to make myself known to just I'm just going to be there. I'm just there. And so,
and eventually someone will be like, what's that girl doing over here?
she's coming back. And I
Anybody asked who that was? I'm sure.
And then I started becoming intentional, right? So I started becoming intentional on what schools and what times I would show up. So as I learned the school, I would know, don't show up at that school at 2:00 because other schools, those staff members may not have a duty, but at this school they do. Yeah. And so I learned that. And then I also learned just to be in it with them. The more that I'm in it with them, if we were in a meeting and a student was having a hard time, I would sit with that student while they were running over and talking with another student. And so allowing people to just be people and be with it, be in it with them, really moved forward in the ability to actually be able to coach.
It sounds like you're really validating their experience too, and making them feel seen and heard, right? Which is what we all want.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
And you're talking about building partnerships and instead of coming in from the top down, that you're coming in even with someone, acknowledging their role, that this is your space that I'm coming into. I wouldn't barge into your home and just start making myself, well, maybe I would. That's a different problem that I need to reflect on.
We can talk about that in the next podcast.
I mean, you come in and you acknowledge what people are doing in their home. If everybody's shoes are off, you take your shoes off. And if someone has something set out, well, that's probably something that you could probably eat. Is anyone sitting in the living room? Nope, we don't sit in that room. Okay, great. So you just you start to feel out what is the context, and it's their space, not yours. And I think it's really smart too, what you were talking about. This isn't information that has to come from me. It can come from you. And to get in it with them and say, I'm here as a partner, because your role is so crucial, because you're like this connector piece. You know what they're doing in other schools, and you can see what's happening in this school, and you know that what they're doing over there might be helpful for these folks over here, and they don't even know about it. Know, you have that information, and so you're building that avenue as a partnership.
Yeah, I started asking permission.
Yes.
Would you like to know what they're doing in other schools?
Yeah, great question.
Instead of telling, let me tell you what they're doing. Would you like to know? And that really opened the door for principals and even behavior specialists to start saying, and can we go visit? Sure, great. Let me know. I'll help set up whatever you want to do to make that visit happen.
Creating that curiosity. Right? Yeah, I love that.
One tip I have, and this is it's kind of a fun one. If you can, start accumulating T-shirts of the buildings that you work for.
Yes, I love doing that.
And so I have many T-shirts of the buildings. And what's tricky though is if you go to 5 different buildings, and you got
a sweatshirt, and then
you got to change in the car between them.
I love that idea, and oftentimes principals were so excited that you would want to be inconsidered part of their team instead of just the district office folks. We actually had some folks that would call us the district office ladies initially. And so literally donning their T-shirt, or a sweatshirt from their building, showing no, I'm invested in our buildings. So little tip.
Yeah, like I said, we have very healthy competition. So I'd walk in one school and they'd be like, well, why don't you have our school shirt? I don't know. Do you have any? I'll buy them. Like, I will gladly buy one from you. I love wearing school shirts. It's my Friday shirts. I would love to have an option every Friday of a different shirt to wear. And so, yeah, it's funny because I'll walk in, why don't you? You're not at that school. You're at our school. I know. I need one of your shirts.
Yeah, you got to give me a hoodie, right?
Yeah, let me know when you're putting your order in. I'll gladly order one.
Yeah. Well, this is really related to like creating some norms and agreements, right? And really showing up for these schools. So let's move on and talk about how we build a culture where data are pieces of information, right? And so what are some of the things you've done to build those agreements and set some norms with teams you work with? I'd love to hear some success stories or some challenges you faced in that realm.
I think Becky touched on it a little earlier, but we have to also be honest what we haven't provided for them. And so when they're looking at their data, to be able to say, yeah, I know why you scored a 0 on that because we haven't done anything to help you with that.
Right.
Oh, oops.
That's on us.
That's on us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is like ownership in the conversations with them.
Reread the question again.
Well, it's really about building a culture where data are pieces of information. And what are some of the agreements you like to set with the teams and some norms that you establish?
Yeah, some of the norms are around what they can expect from me. And so one of the things that my partner, Coach Kristen, and I would do is we would say it's our goal to make it to at least one tiered meeting a month. In tier 1 and tier 2, for example. And it would vary depending on what the admin and the PBIS coach would maybe need us to do that year. But so we would set a norm with what they could expect in terms of our showing up. And then we specifically around data, what they could expect from us was their building specific data snapshot every month that we would provide. And it was a snapshot of what happened in their building based on their reporting every month. And then they also knew like, okay, I can depend on this diversity data as well and this equity data that we're not really tracking and doing much with, but we're planting seeds and we're just becoming aware. And so those were some of the norms that we used as coaches.
When you were talking, it made me think of our former director, Dr. Rob Horner, who we talked to. We had the privilege of talking to for
back in September. That was a long episode.
It was long. He had a lot to say, but we were ready to hear it all. He talked to us then about one of the first schools that he showed up to as a coach, essentially. He's a researcher, but he was working with this school. And he showed up and he brought with him a graph on paper at the time because internet was...
A couple years ago,
not ready to be released. And so he showed up with the graph and the team was like, that, okay, cute. And then he left and then he came back and he had an updated version of the graph and he showed it to them. And they were like, oh, you're kind of serious about looking at this data, aren't you? And he was like, yeah, we're going to look at it all the time. And then he left and he came back and there was one day, I guess he didn't have the graph and the team started to ask him, well, where's that?
Yeah, where's our data?
But where's that graph you keep bringing us, you know? And so keeping that as like a regular thing, like we always look at data and we always talk about it so that it becomes this very natural thing and it's not so scary that looking at data always is a piece of information, even when we share it at the end of the year as part of our evaluation. It's still a piece of information and we know and we're comfortable with it. So I think that's probably another key part of this is just like the regularity of it.
Yeah, that's what I think as coaches we can bring is that consistency, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good that we bring that thought process of like, what does your data say?
Yeah.
Like, and it's not just, TFI. It is like, what does your perception data say? What does your outcome data say?
That's
like,
right.
How are you doing as a whole? And then teaching them how to use that tiered data, that fidelity data, to just take pulse points. Like, what story is your data telling you? And what are areas that you've grown and what are areas that you've decreased and why? And it's not always, I think it goes back to the why is not always bad. The why could be, oh my gosh, well, we had, 20 veteran staff and now our demographics of our staff changed. And so we now have a different demographic of our staff. Okay, well, let's talk about then what that data story is and then what is your action plan for it. So I think one of the norms that we have is it's not just about looking at the data, but if you can look at the data, but if you don't use the data, then and really ask why, then really your data is just sitting there. And the wrong data and inaccurate data and data that is not present is just as harmful as having the data there. I would actually say it's more harmful when we don't have the data in the right format.
You know, this has reminded me to quote Dr. Rob Horner, the data, they don't tell us the answers though, they tell us what questions to ask.
Yeah.
Right? And that's exactly what you're describing.
Yeah. We actually did a relaunch of our Tier 1 teams and asked our Tier 1 teams to have specific processes. So we wanted everybody using the TIPS form because it actually leads you through the
Team-initiated problem solving.
Yeah, thank you.
Another acronym.
Another acronym. We wanted them to use that form, and we wanted it not only to look at their school-wide data, right, their outcome data, but we also made sure that their TFI action plan was included in that because we can't forget about the systems that we need to build as well that we need to go back and refresh. And then the other thing is we've started to normalize that things need to change and it's okay. It's okay to adjust. It's okay to adapt because that's really what we need to do in a culture and in a setting is adjust and change to who we are, who our students are, and really continuing to remember we have to keep students at the center of it. So our students tell us what's working and what's not working. And if our systems, which support the adults, aren't working, then it makes it really hard for our adults to support our students.
It makes me think of what our purpose of our data and setting norms around, sharing that data. And one of the things that we recognized a need for with our district admin leaders is that before we started sharing out the monthly snapshots, there became concerns about, well, who's comparing these snapshots, of our buildings and what they're doing and what their numbers are saying. And so we made agreements essentially with them that we were going to keep that confidential, which building was doing what, and showing various data points or of success or challenge when we were sharing the data initially. But then if people wanted to target an area that they were struggling in, that we would be able to share that information. And over time, over several years, that guard really dropped down of needing to keep the buildings confidential. And then that data became more and more transparent. And they began being invested with just putting their school names on that data when it was shared with the whole group. And then they could more easily, and not go through an intermediary, if you will, to go seek out that resource of what are you doing in your building to address X, Y, or Z data point.
I think you bring up a really good point, which is things don't change immediately. They change over time. And so one of the conversations we've had is, what do we want it to look like? And then how do we get it there? So just recently we had that conversation of what do we want this to look like? And really what we want it to look like is schools feeling successful. Again, going back to not fully implemented, right? We want them to feel like they're successful in what they're doing. And so how do we help lead them there? How do we help celebrate them? And so one of the things that we're doing next year is we are asking for all of our schools to put their meetings on our calendar. Sometimes it's just so we can stop in and
Yeah,
give
I'm in the
success.
area. Why not?
Yeah, and
by the
be their
school.
cheerleader, right? But we have to think about how do we change that slowly because it doesn't change immediately. It takes time.
That really resonates with me, though, as a former teacher and probably many people in the audience. For you, it's like backwards planning, right? You're starting with the end in mind, and you're saying, okay, how do we get there, right?
Yep.
Yep. So
That's
it's
the same with our
it's just at a
schools.
different level.
Yeah, action plan. So what do you want it to look like and what do you need to do to make it look like that? So you've got a system that's not working. What do you want it to look like? And then how do you get it there?
Yeah,
What's
you
the
get to define
training?
it.
What's the skills? What's the supports? What's the celebrations that you need to do along the way to get there?
Yeah, I think Dr. Erin Chaparro, she works in our office, and she has talked about the continuous improvement process quite a bit.
Yeah.
And there are phases of implementation, and it's non-linear. They show it it goes in a direction, but the truth is you're in and out of it all the time. So using data to identify, we used to do this really well. What happened? Oh, Danielle left.
Right.
She did it all the time.
Yeah, right.
So now we have to go back and reestablish that in our system. So I think in her research, it was something like it takes 6 years or 4 years, something like that, to even get out of that initial implementation phase or something. It's incredible the amount of time this work takes, and that it's consistent. You have to be consistent in it in order to improve along the way. So I think what we set out to do was to talk about this myth of data being used as a gotcha at the district level. And I think what we can land on is that it really depends on the culture at the district. And you've talked to us a little bit about the ways that your district has worked with schools to create thought partnerships, to transform data as a piece of information rather than as a tool for punishing. And so what are the ways, if people are out there listening to us, what are some of your top tips that they could do right now to start to transform that culture within their setting, school, district, wherever?
I think one of the things that comes to my mind is, one, relationships, right?
Yeah.
So get out there, build your relationships.
Yeah, when was the last time you went to that school?
Right. Yep. When's the last time that you knew, not just went, but knew the people that worked there?
Yeah, had a good conversation with them.
Yep. And understood what their everyday was like.
Yeah.
So a lot of times, we can say I have my little area that I work in. And so if I only ever stay in my little area, I don't actually know what's going on in the schools. And then I also cannot identify areas of gaps that we're providing at the district or not providing. So I'd say first, just be in your schools. That's one of the best things that you can do. Because until you actually get in your schools, then there's not that trust to want to hear what you have to say about their systems. And then also sometimes, sit in on the TFI with a school. Sit in and listen to their conversations, and ask questions. Don't tell, right? Telling is actually, you're at that point putting on that consultant hat, and you're acting from your brain rather than your heart, and that staying curious. So I think I would say build relationships and stay curious, and then just sit in it with them at the very beginning.
Love that. You're showing up. Yeah.
Show up.
And being authentic.
Yep.
I think as you were talking, Charisse, I was thinking to myself about experiences I've had when I'm completing TFI walkthroughs. And one of the recommendations I would have, if you're in a coaching role or in a role where you're doing the walkthroughs, that feels a little bit like judgment. It can feel to the people receiving that. And what I would say is leave your agenda at the door when in your car, wherever, whatever. As soon as you walk through those doors, set your agenda aside. It's so easy to have competing agendas that come from really solid, foundational, needed spaces in education. And so setting your agenda to the side and showing up and being present for those conversations that may ensue, because it takes some vulnerability for them to come at you with, I know you're having to take this data point for us, but we do it this way. Why isn't that valued? Or why isn't that, representative of that data point? And so dropping your agenda, which is to get to so over many teachers, in that example, to get those data points and just say, I'm going to be here and be present with this person. I'm going to text my partner who's doing other spots in the building, and that I'm going to need to stay in this conversation and listen. And I think going back to then, checking in with your admin team or your tier 1 or tier 2 team that you're supporting and saying, what is it that you all are needing from me this year? Where are you at with things, and what do you need from me? And then what do you want me to take back to the district office team? Mm-hmm. Because I work in advocacy for efficiency for staff in the systems that make our kids well, right? Or the help create a wellness environment for our kids. And so what can I take back for you? So thank you for the input, and let me take that back.
I love your idea of dropping the agenda. And I think that really resonates with what PBIS is, right? It's a framework. It's not a curriculum. It's not a program. And so if we are doing a framework, then we are taking into consideration that school's culture, their climate, their people, their kids, right? Like what they value. And so if we come in with our agenda of what we saw at a different school or what was happening at our school, then we're actually setting them up for failure right away.
Or our next steps of implementation district-wide, because as a district coach, you can get really mired in what we're trying to do district-wide and not be present in that particular building.
Yes.
Or even feel like, why aren't you using the things that we built, right? Like, and that's where we have to ask the question, not
Why are you doing it the way I would do it? God.
right, right.
I gave you the information. Just do it this way.
Yeah. And so I think then that's where, again, it goes back to like staying curious of like, can you tell me what's working and not working? Like, how does, like, what resonates with you? How could we make this better? How could you, like, how will this meet your need? How does it not meet your need? And what do you need from us, right? To set you up for success. One of the things I always tell principals when I'm in a coaching session with them is that my job is to make them look good. So
Ooh, that sounds great. I bet they love that.
yeah, my job is to make you look good. So I need to know what you want and where you want to go because you're the leader. My job is to align with you. My job is to support you and to provide the resources for you so you feel successful. Because a successful leader then really embodies and is able to support their staff well. And so I always say, my job is to make you look good. So I'm going to tell you what to say, and then, or I'm going to help you get to that point of what to say. And then I'm going to be your champion, and I'm going to sit there and cheerlead for you while you lead your staff in this work.
Yeah, all of that, and then just keep doing it for a long time.
Yep.
Simple, so basic. It's job security, though, right?
Yeah, sure is,
Well, we really appreciate all of your thoughts and sharing those with us, with everybody out there listening, with our live studio audience here with us today. It's been great to hear your experience, your expertise, and the ways that you all are able to talk people through how to use data as a storytelling tool, as a piece of information in order to improve the outcomes that they all want to see in their building. So thanks so much.
Really connected with the theme of this conference too, rooted in relationships. Like that's truly the foundation. So thanks for sharing so much with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. It was fun.